Good afternoon and welcome from the Center for Healthy Sex here in sunny but fiery Southern California. Today is Friday, December 8th, and it's my good pleasure today to talk to you about my friend and colleague Marty Simpson, who's going to take you on a very interesting tour today of what it means to be in the second phase of recovery from sex addiction. But before we begin, I'm Alexandra Katahakis. I'm the clinical director of Center for Healthy Sex here in Los Angeles. And I just want to let you know that we have a professional sex therapy training coming up shortly. It will be starting in February, and that's for local therapists. It's an 18-hour course. We also have a women's love addiction workshop coming up January 19th through 21st. And in general, we offer intensive outpatient programs for males and females struggling with sex and love addiction, as well as partners of sex addicts. So I want to talk to you again about Marty Simpson. She's a licensed marriage family therapist. She's a certified sex addiction therapist, and she's a Daring Way facilitator, certified Daring Way facilitator. She is the director of partner treatment at Center for Health Sex, and she's got extensive experience in working in the field of sex addiction treatment. She's also trained in the psychobiological approach to couple therapy, which means she's really looking not just to people's psychology, but also their biological cues and how they can better work together as a couple to soothe each other and tend to each other's needs, as opposed to reading those cues as threatening. So it's a very powerful cutting-edge modality she engages in. She's also trained by the Association for Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists and the principles of group psychotherapy training with the Group Psychotherapy Association here in Los Angeles, which is quite prestigious. She's trained in EMDR and Pat Ogden's sensory motor psychotherapy processing. This is also a somatic and attachment-based way of working. So all to say that Marty is working with the newest modalities there are out there. And so she's taken that and created a specialty in working with partners of sex addicts and also those who have been betrayed by infidelity. So without further delay, it's my good pleasure to turn you over to the very creative and talented, I must say, mind of Marty Simpson.
Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate it. And thank you, Alex and Douglas, for having me on this webinar today. I'm excited to do this. I think Alex did a great job of introducing me, so I won't spend too much time talking about, I think she did a really good job of explaining how I utilize my trauma training and my certified sex addiction training to combine together to help treat addicts, partners, and couples in recovery. I have a lot of compassion for all the components of these coupleships that come together, come into therapy rather for infidelity repair. It's such a difficult process to go through. And because I like to work with all of the different treatment entities, the addicts or betrayers, the betrayed, the partners, and also the couples. I would say about 60% of my clientele right now are couples in recovery. So this is my passion, and I'm so happy to be talking here today about how a betrayer can really help their partner heal. So as we start here, I want to just let you guys know, there's a little bit of delay on me advancing the slide here. If you're patient, there we go. This presentation really is for betrayers who really want to help their partners heal, for people who do have remorse for their behavior, and who are willing to do whatever it takes to heal their relationships. This presentation really is not for people who lack remorse or are still in the place of blaming their partner for their choices and are not interested in repairing their relationship. If you're a person who does lack remorse, I would highly suggest that you work with your therapist on this. Some people are often confused about why they don't experience remorse. They actually want to, and they know they ought to, and yet they have a difficult time accessing those feelings. And quite often that is because they haven't really looked at the origins of this behavior. Often with addiction, or even if you don't identify as an addict, But if you're a betrayer who doesn't really understand why you act outside your relationship, it might be because there were emotional deficits in childhood or something like that. And often what's required first, ironically, is that that person get in touch with their own self-compassion so that they sort of understand, where this got originated. And then that sets them up to be in a better position to actually have compassion for others and to be able to help their partners heal. Shame is a complex emotion, and it can really stand as a block in this process. So, working with a therapist to identify the sources and the original origins of that is very important. So as we start here, I want to set the premise that when you betray your agreements in your primary relationship, that's your rupture. And it really is your job to repair that rupture. It doesn't mean that there aren't relational issues. Every relationship has issues of some sort. But the decision to go outside your relationship to solve those issues is solely on you. And so with that in mind, what's important to realize is that when you do choose to betray, you essentially have downgraded all those other relational issues that you might have worked on in therapy to sort of a second place position, because you first have to attend to the trauma that occurs for the partner as a result of the betrayal. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about what infidelity is. Basically, infidelity is, the keeping of secrets and lying and not being authentic in your relationship. Most partners will say that the lying is the most damaging, the most traumatic part of this, because they thought they knew their person, they thought they knew their partner, and come to find out that he or she may have a whole separate life is very destabilizing. And it's really necessary to have rigorous honesty as you go through the repair process. Holding secrets in a primary relationship is usually seen as a betrayal, even if there hasn't been contact with another person. So, even if it's a web chats or sexting or pornography, often the partner will see that as a betrayal because it's a secret, because you've been holding it a secret. Often in the course of this process of holding secrets, betrayers will do something called gaslighting, which has actually become sort of a popularized term. It comes from the 1944, I think, movie Gaslamp. And it's a manipulative tactic in which a person or an entity, in order to gain more power, makes a victim question their reality. So this person may have suspicions that there's something untoward going on in the relationship, and when they bring those suspicions forward, they're told, "No, you're crazy, you're paranoid, what's wrong with you?" That sort of thing. So that's often a really damaging part of this too. Following the discovery of your acting out behavior or your betrayal, your partner will probably have a lot of questions. This is so normal. It's common for a betrayer in this situation to minimize the behavior or tell only that part that he or she already believes the partner knows, leaving out the worst parts. This is pretty normal too. This can lead to a number of subsequent disclosures as the truth just sort of slowly leaks out. So I want to highly encourage you not to do this process called staggered disclosure, which is where you keep saying, "Oh, this is all of it, you know everything," but you're holding something back. And then they make another discovery. And then you say, "Okay, now you know it all," and you hold something back. And I will say also, this sometimes happens at the advice of therapists who are uneducated about sex addiction and betrayal. I had one couple who was told by a previous therapist that they should, after the session, go out into the hallway and disclose the secrets that the husband had been hanging on to. And they did this, and the husband disclosed like 30 years of acting out behavior, and it was devastating for the partner and highly traumatic. And she was really left destabilized. So, so I just want to highly encourage you not to do a staggered disclosure, but get yourself some therapeutic help and find out how you can tell the whole truth in a therapeutic process. This process we call formal disclosure. And formal disclosure, is a very complex process. It takes, typically 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer, to have the betrayer work with a therapist to detail all the acting out behavior, all the lies and secrets, in a very clinical format, and include that in a document that then he or she will read to the betrayed partner in a therapeutic setting. Formal disclosure could be worthy of its own full-time, full-hour webinar. So I'm not going to go into too much of it here today, but I will say I would only recommend this process with someone like a certified sex addiction therapist who's been trained in formal disclosure, and I would also ask that person how many disclosures have they conducted. And even though it seems like a really scary process if you're the betrayer, there's some research that suggests that 96% of addicts who went into the process thinking, I would say, I think it's 60% go into the process thinking, okay, this is going to be a good idea. And 40% are saying, no way, I don't want to do this. But 96% of addicts and betrayers come out of that process saying, this was a good idea. It offers an opportunity for a clean slate. It demonstrates a willingness to tell the whole truth. And it begins to heal the wound of not knowing for the partner, because the wounding really is about what they didn't know. It can really help the partner's system begin to settle. The other thing about formal disclosures, it does really help an addict see in plain sight when that addict or betrayer sees all of their behavior listed. It really is an awakening moment for that betrayer as well. So I think it actually helps the recovery process for the betrayer so much. So, when a person goes through say they've been betraying their partner, and then they get a treatment piece and they step into 12-step and they're really doing well in their recovery, they often are confused about why their partner is still seeing them as a liar. And what I want to tell you is that once your partner knows that you can look right in their eyes and lie to them about the most tender part of your relationship, they, from that point on, they will always know that you can do that. So once you have lied in your relationship, your partner really is always going to question your behavior. That doesn't mean you can't have really great recovery. I wouldn't do the work that I do unless I saw healing happen every day in my practice. So you can go forward knowing that your person has the capacity to lie, and learn to trust again. It's a long, slow process. It involves a consistent change of behavior over time. But just because you've gotten into 12-step, working with a sponsor, had a treatment piece, doesn't mean that your partner's going to all of a sudden, trust you again. So just know that partners have to go through a process of really reorganizing their whole life with you, and they they have to sort of reevaluate and resort all the instances of connection between you, and that's a normal process. This is because you were supposed to be their safe harbor, and instead of providing and protecting for them in that way, you cause them great harm. So the crux of the matter here is that betrayal is trauma. It's relational trauma. It's the breaking of an agreement or doing something to hurt a relationship that hits the partner's system as trauma. And I think you'll get from this webinar today that that's what we're really going to be talking about, is how to manage the trauma. What tools can you use? What can you do to help your partner heal? If you want to ask a question, I encourage you guys to use your chat to do so as we're going through this. So it's really important that you become a trauma expert, that you learn to recognize and understand the symptoms of PTSD, that you know what helps settle a trauma reaction in your partner, and that you become excellent at repair, at the tools of repair. So I know this slide looks intimidating, and it's really not. It's really quite simple. So hang in there with me while I explain. This is Dan Siegel's window of tolerance. Dan Siegel's a psychologist and psychiatrist at UCLA, and he created this to describe what our nervous system goes through in everyday normal functioning and also with traumatic events. So basically, trauma is a normal nervous system reaction to threat. Our nervous system rises and falls during the day, and you can see that line between those two solid dark lines. There's that line representing our nervous system and how it rises and falls every day, all the time. So if you are, running on the treadmill, your nervous system is going to rise to the top of that window of tolerance, perhaps. And then if you take a nap or something, it's going to fall to the bottom of that window of tolerance. But basically, within this window of tolerance, we're able to digest our food, smile and laugh, and be involved in other social engagement. We're able to learn new skills, like learn to play the guitar or something like that. And in this window of tolerance, we can rest and digest. But when a trauma happens, and that pink starburst there would represent a small trauma, like maybe you had to slam your brakes on in the car or something. When that occurs, our sympathetic nervous system takes our nervous system process outside the window up to hyperarousal. And up in hyperarousal, our heart rate and our respiration increase, our digestion slows down, and we go into a fight or flight and high freeze state for a while. It's difficult up here in the hyperarousal state. It's difficult to laugh and smile and play and learn new skills. But then, if you didn't hit the car in front of you, say, your nervous system will sort of slowly, via the parasympathetic nervous system, the dorsal vagal response, you'll be able to return to rest and digest again. Now, if the trauma is significant enough, and if it represents a life threat or is very repetitive, then represented by that red starburst, you're going to jump out of the window again into hyperarousal, and now you're going to stay up there in more of a PTSD kind of symptomology. And I have listed there some of the aspects of that, and we'll talk about that in a second too. And as a last-ditch effort, if your fight and flight resources are not helping, then your nervous system is going to have you plummet into a collapse state of hypoarousal. And you'll see at the end of the graph there, that plummet down below the window of tolerance into hypoarousal, which is a submit state or a feigned death, a collapse. All of this is done via the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, which goes from the brain to all the major viscera of the body. So PTSD symptoms include these. Now, anytime you see vehement emotion, so instead of fear, terror, instead of anger, rage, instead of anxiety, panic, whenever you see vehement emotion, that's a really good indicator that there is trauma present. And it may be the present trauma, and it may also be trauma from the past. I'm seeing a question here I just want to read. Here's the question. Oftentimes, an affair is characterized as being about sex, and betrayers seem to be referred to as addicts. But it also appears that some affairs are the result of an emotional void, not a sex void. And an emotional relationship develops outside the marriage, i.e., emotional affair. From that, the relationship evolves into a physical relationship, but the affair was never about sex. It was about fulfilling an emotional need. So why are the betrayers characterized as addicts, and why is the term sobriety used, as it feels this puts an incorrect, inaccurate representation on the affair, which may make it more difficult for the betrayer to understand and then be successful with therapy? Thank you. I appreciate that question, because I actually wanted to say at the beginning of this, it doesn't matter if you identify as a sex addict or a person who is a betrayer. And I'm trying to use the word betrayer quite a lot in this presentation because of that. So basically, you can, to answer your question a little more completely, you can use sex like a drug. And when you do that, typically in sex addiction, you're going to see the characteristics of addiction, the hallmarks of addiction, which would include tolerance and escalation of behavior, more frequency, more time spent than intended over time, or withdrawal symptoms. If you're using it to medicate away feelings of depression, anxiety, you might notice that when you're not using the relationship or the sex as a drug, that you start feeling those feelings of depression, anxiety. Another hallmark of addiction is a continuation despite harmful consequences. So maybe you get caught a little bit, or your partner's suspicious, or you get some kind of correction at work, and you find yourself continuing the behavior, and that's when it's sort of become more of a compulsive behavior. But certainly people can go outside a relationship and not be addicted. So this repair process here is for everyone who has betrayed. It's not just for someone who identifies as a sex addict. So thanks for asking that question. It's a really important delineation. And I want you to know that the tools to help your partner heal from the trauma of your betrayal are not specific to sex addiction at all. Okay, thanks. Often, whether it's a regular affair or whether it's an addictive process, often there has been some kind of emotional deficit in childhood that has led a person to seek that as a coping skill, rather than, say, talking to their partner and bringing the issues in the relationship directly to their person, or seeking counseling, or talking to healthy friends, something like that. So you're also right to note that that it's often an emotional component to that. Thanks so much for that question. Okay, so PTSD symptoms, they occur in 4 clusters. Hyperarousal, which can look like insomnia. So many partners, very few don't have insomnia, at least episodes or periods of time. It can often involve an exaggerated startle response, just sort of being jumpy and on edge in general. The searching behavior that partners go through, like looking through your email, and I have quite a few partners who have learned, with no IT experience, learned how to hack into systems, pretty sophisticated systems. Necessity being the mother of invention, I think, in that situation. The checking up behavior, the question asking, what's called snooping, really is an effort to seek safety and to sort of stabilize again their environment, which has become very destabilized. Their angry outbursts and becoming easily upset is all part of that hyper-aroused nervous system response. Re-experiencing is another cluster. This is very uncomfortable for the partner, for the betrayed, including intrusive thoughts and rumination and obsessive thinking, like not being able to stop checking social media, that sort of thing. Often those things like social media or email, was what caused the discovery in the first place. So from the betrayed's perspective, they often go back to those behaviors because they feel like that's what kept them safe, is finding this out on their own. Also, avoidance behaviors, isolation from social supports and friends, from you, avoiding sex, really common. Usually partners don't feel very safe after a discovery. Behaviors, places and people that they may avoid because it represents the acting out behavior. And numbing. I always assess for alcohol use and drug use. Sometimes the numbing comes in the form of shopping and spending too much, or sleeping a lot, or just, keeping very, very busy. Somebody asked, do you recommend a different treatment plan when the partner is the husband of a heterosexual couple? When the partner's a husband. Yeah, I actually have several male partners in my clientele currently, and it is a different experience. They experience this in a different way. They often react to it in a different way. But they are suffering from trauma just like a female partner would be. And so I do still attend to the trauma. It's more in the social impairment area that I see the difference. And it does hit their system in a different way. So there's a slightly different treatment plan, but as far as the trauma, which is what I'm talking about today, all these tools are useful for female betrayers and male betrayed. They are also useful for gay male and lesbian couples. And really even polyamorous couples, if you've betrayed the agreement in your relationship, all these tools will work. Okay, thanks for the question. I have another question here. In Sweden, it is common to initiate partner therapy fairly quickly and work with the relationship. What do you think about that? Should you wait? I am very much in favor of starting couples therapy as soon as the couple and the betrayed partner is ready to do that. But I would use a word of caution. It's not really therapy. It's more like triage. The beginning part of this, when there's still high crisis going on, it's crisis management and triage. And slowly over time, as recovery gets stabilized, you do move into more deeper intimacy issues in the relationship. Good question. Thanks. So what can you do? First off, I want you to know it's so important to be willing to repair right away. There may be times when the betrayed partner is asking questions that you don't agree with, or making claims that you don't agree with, or asking questions that you think might be even harmful, or you might disagree about the points that they're making. And what I want to say to you is the most important thing for you to do is attend to the repair. And I'm going to give you specific tools for that in a moment here. You want to attend to the repair first. So you can always go back and discuss the points later when their nervous system has settled. But when there's trauma in the room, the only thing to do is attend to the trauma. Because the trauma will get in the way of any other explanation or repair or anything that you're doing. So really you have to use the tools for trauma repair first. So, first of all, I want you to know that that you have everything you need to help your partner heal. I see healing happen all the time. And like I said before, I wouldn't do this work if I didn't see that process happening. It would be way too depressing to do this work if I didn't see repair happening. And as a matter of fact, partners and couples that go through this sort of process usually end up saying that we have a deeper, more connected relationship than we ever thought was possible after the recovery process has been engaged for about a year. It takes about a year for that to happen typically. So the concept of co-regulation is something that's really important for you to understand, that you can use your soma, your body, your facial expressions, the sound of your voice, all that to help co-regulate your partner. Basically, co-regulation is using your more regulated nervous system. In that moment, you're more calm than your partner is. So you're using your regulated nervous system to help calm their more dysregulated nervous system in that moment. So first, you can And I would recommend always asking permission to give touch. Would it be okay if I held your hand or if I touched your knee? Or if you have a partner that's very willing to touch, a chest-to-chest hug is the quickest way to sort of calm down somebody else's nervous system in this process of co-regulation. But sometimes partners aren't comfortable with that, and that's fine. I would respect their boundaries. But if they will accept touch on the knee or holding a hand, that's great. You want to focus on the prosody of your voice. This is the pitch, the highs and lows of your voice. Make sure that your voice is sounding friendly, that you soften your volume, that you provide eye contact, and that you have a pleasant facial expression. And that you're using your body language, that you're not sitting slumped in your chair with your arms crossed or something else that might indicate resistance to the process of healing. So keep all those things in check. And then you want to go to repairing quickly. Now, here's a tool that I created utilizing my work in trauma and my work with couples. And basically, I put together this tool. It's a very easy thing to remember, which makes it useful. And it also hits the very essential pieces that most betrayed partners really need from their betrayer in the moments of repair. So the first one is to reflect. First, simply listen to what they're saying. Listen for their feelings and their experience. And then you're going to reflect back. You're going to repeat back what they said. And I would recommend not trying to paraphrase or put it in your own words so much. I would actually use the words that they use because they use them for a reason. Those words are significant for their experience. So try, as you're listening, try to imagine what it would feel like to be in their position. What would happen to you if you found out that they had been lying and holding a part of themselves outside the relationship. Try to imagine, how you might react. And this is a good skill building for empathy. Arguing the points isn't the point. Right now, all you're doing is listening and reflecting back what you hear. This allows a partner to feel heard and understood, which most people want most of the time, to be heard and understood by their special person. So you can start by saying, okay, so I hear you saying, and if that sounds too psychobabbly, find your own words for it, that's fine. But first of all, repeat what you hear them saying. The second R is take responsibility. So here, you're going to validate their experience. And in this stage, I want to encourage you, if you don't agree with what your partner is saying, you were home 20 minutes late and they're sure that's because you were on the phone with an acting out partner, say that didn't happen. What you can do is validate what it must be like to be in their position. And with all that you have done, of course they go to those places in their mind. Of course they jump to those conclusions. So you can validate that. I'm the reason that you have these suspicions. I understand that. And I really want to take responsibility for putting you in this situation where you're always worried about what I'm doing. Okay. So you're right. I did that to you is an example. I'm the reason you feel this way. It makes sense that you would feel this way. That sort of thing. It's all part of taking responsibility. And then the last essential piece is the repair. Most people jump to this first. So I want to encourage you to do this in the order of the 3 R's, reflecting first. And that helps their nervous system start to settle a little bit. And then you take responsibility and it settles even more. Now they're ready to hear your repair. But if you jump right in with, oh, I'm so sorry, they think, heard that before, and it doesn't really mean much, right? So do them in order, reflecting, taking responsibility, and then repairing. So here's where you would say, I'm sorry, but I would get to know your partner. Some partners absolutely need to hear the words, I'm sorry, and other partners never want to hear those words again because they've heard them so many times before. And I'd say it's pretty evenly split with the people that I see. So find out what works for your partner, what they would rather have you say in those moments. This is a time to make promises that you can keep. I would suggest that you under promise and over deliver. This is a time to make declarations, something like, I will never do this to you again. But again, don't say that if you aren't sure that you will never do it again. Here, only promise what you can promise, but declarations are powerful. When you know that you're in solid recovery and you know that you have the tools now and you get why you are acting out, and you are committed to a lifelong process of recovery, then make that declaration. It's very powerful. But keep in mind that broken promises are just another betrayal that you're piling on that heap of betrayal. So make sure you're only promising what you can follow through with. So there they are again, the 3 R's: reflect, take responsibility, and repair. Should you wait with the relationship therapy, work with intimacy, etc., until the partner has worked with his or her trauma? Thanks for that question. Yeah, and I think I might have covered this a little before. This may have been written while I was answering, but the first part of relationship therapy is going to be crisis management and triage. And yes, as soon as possible, that partner needs to get, or the betrayed person needs to get into trauma work. Most often, very, very few betrayed parties don't need some kind of trauma work. EMDR, sensory motor psychotherapy, are really great for that. This is another question. I'm not confident that the betrayers I've seen aren't in their own hypo or hyper aroused state around the person that they betrayed. Yeah, sure, maybe in time, but early, I'm skeptical. Yes. Okay, so very good point. Addiction, for sure, but often lots of simple betrayals originate in that betrayer's own trauma. So it's very likely that a person who betrays has their own experience of trauma. And so often they need to get to their trauma work. And that's what makes this so complex, because on the one hand, they've got to repair with their partner if they want that relationship to survive. On the other hand, they have a lot of work on their own to do, and it's deep work. So tricky, but yep, sometimes it's best for the two of them to first dive into a treatment piece individually and just see, a couples therapist for sort of the logistics, like if they're separated, who's seeing the kids when, that sort of thing. And as you go on, the couples work becomes more about the relationship. Yeah. Somebody says, is it my fault that I am so resentful for the things my partner has done while in active use? No, of course not. Of course not. It's a horrible thing to discover the betrayal of your partner. And I would say that resentment is that poison you drink hoping somebody else dies. So resentment isn't going to be helpful, and I would highly recommend that you work on that trauma so that you don't end up harming your own system as a result of it. And I would highly recommend that you work with a trauma expert and somebody who is going to help you with your own empowerment too, because both of those pieces are really important in the healing process. Thanks for the question. Some things to avoid. You want to avoid going to shame. Brene Brown, who studies shame, I think a lot of us know who Brene is now, says that we all have shame. No one wants to talk about it. And the less we talk about it, the more we have it, the more powerful it becomes. So shame is something that we do need to identify and talk to our support systems about. Shame is a good thing to talk about in therapy, in 12-step meetings, with your good friends who are looking out for your best interest. But in the repair process with your partner who you've betrayed, shame will look like you're making it all about yourself again. And so it's really not helpful in the repair process. If you find yourself going into shame, take a timeout, a structured timeout. Tell your person, hey, I need 15 minutes. I'm going to walk around the block and I'll be back to continue this discussion. That would be a structured timeout. You're saying I'm coming back, and you're letting them know where you're going and when you'll be back. But if you find yourself falling into kind of a shame spiral, that's a time to take a timeout with that with that attachment piece. I'll be back. I'm not ending this conversation, but staying stuck in the shame is really not going to be helpful in this process. I was writing down a bunch of things that I thought were not helpful in this process. And it occurred to me that nearly all of them began with the letter D. So I made up this little slide, avoid a disaster. And here are the things I think aren't helpful in the repair process. Denial. Denial is not helpful. And often when somebody has been medicating their stress and their, relational issues with an affair or acting out behavior of some sort, there is usually a component of denial that needs to be sort of broken through. So the antidote for that would be taking responsibility. And again, work with a sponsor, a therapist, that sort of thing will help. Defensiveness. Defensiveness is not helpful. It comes up a lot in this process. It's difficult to be the betrayer and to hear your partner angry at you for a good long stretch of time. However, that's the situation that you created, your rupture, your repair. And I'm going to talk to you in a moment about how to turn defensiveness into curiosity, and use that defensiveness as a signal that you really need to get curious about your person. Detachment. Detaching or moving away from or not being available, shutting down emotionally or something like that, not helpful. So every time, really want to encourage you that every time your partner reaches out to you, you reach back, whether that's text message, phone call, email, or, in the kitchen. That you're always sending that sign of, I'm here for you. Yeah, I'm here. Distance, not helpful. So really work at staying present in the present moment with your person, and the 3 R's will help you facilitate that. And distraction. Often we can get so busy, especially in our current lives. If you can avoid saying yes to the things that don't need to happen during this process of recovery and keep your life really simple so you can really focus on the repair, that's going to really benefit your relationship. So turning your defensiveness into curiosity. Defensive response really makes it all about you again. And it actually makes you look more guilty. So it's not helpful for you and it's not helpful for your partner. Defensiveness usually is about shame. It usually means that that person has touched on something that you feel deeply shameful about. And so you're defending against it because nobody likes to feel shame. However, shame isn't going to help here. And shame is really a signal that you have work to do. Maybe you're in your own therapy. So I want to encourage you to learn how to ask curiosity questions. And this reminded me of a joke that I heard. Here's the joke. What are 3 little words that every woman wants to hear? Tell me more. Turning your defensiveness into curiosity really means noticing that you're defensive, noticing what happens in your body when you get defensive, when you feel shame. Where do you feel that in your body? That's a great source. Your body's a great source of information for you. And basically every feeling that we have originates as a sensation in your body. So if you can get to notice what shame feels like, notice it, take a pause and say, oh, I'm defensive. Let me try to be curious about my partner's experience instead. And here are some examples of curiosity statements and questions. I want to understand how this impacts you. Or have I done this before? Or what can I do to help you right now? In what ways has this hurt you or us? What does this mean to you? What does this incident symbolize for you? What did this remind you of? What do I do that makes this better? What do I do that makes this worse? What would you be free? What would free you or us up to be more present for in our relationship? If you could have it all your way, what would you have me do? How would a change impact our relationship? So you're taking this defensive stance and you're turning around and offering it as curiosity for their experience. Very, very powerful. One thing I want to encourage you with as well is that it's very common to be in different stages of recovery. The betrayer is in one stage and the betrayed is another stage. And it's really so walk through this slide with me. The blue line represents sort of normal functioning. Able to go to work, able to, have social interactions with friends. You're functioning pretty well. So you're functioning normally, and then that red starburst is the moment of discovery, or sometimes disclosure, but it's usually discovery. And this is where the acting out behavior, the betrayal, the affair is discovered. And the green line there is representative of the betrayer, and the purple line is representative of the betrayed. So typically what happens first, and everyone's different, but this is what I see most often, is the discovery moment is the betrayer takes a deep dive. They don't function well at all after discovery. They're, everyone's world gets turned upside down. The betrayed definitely has that experience as well. Sometimes they can't function at all. But what I see most often is the betrayed partner kind of holds it together for a while in order to get the betrayer into some kind of help. So they will, start searching for therapists, or they'll go into hyper arousal and hypervigilance, and they'll start looking for other, details about the acting out behavior or the affair. But often that betrayed party sort of holds it together for a while until the betrayer, maybe they go through a separation, maybe the betrayer gets a therapist, maybe they do a treatment piece like a residential piece or like an intensive outpatient program like Center for Healthy Sex has, something like that. And then once that betrayer is sort of taken care of in therapy, that's often when the betrayed partner really collapses. And at this point, they often haven't sought their own help because they've been so focused on how to, arrest this behavior that is damaging their relationship. So often they take a dive, and then the betrayer comes home from treatment, say, and he or she is feeling really good. They've got new tools. They're understanding themselves. They're all ready for recovery, but that betrayed party is still really kind of pulling together the pieces of their lives and very destabilized. And that can happen that way for quite a while as the betrayed party maybe does 12-step and gets a sponsor, is working the steps, or continues in therapy, or ends the affair and does all the appropriate things. And it's common for a betrayer at this point to say, well, why is my partner not getting better? Why aren't you getting over it? We hear that a lot. And that's really a misunderstanding of what that betrayed person is going through. They've got a trauma now that will be with them for a good long time. And so it's important to know that there may be moments when it feels like the betrayed progress is sort of happening, and the betrayer's progress is happening and going smoothly, and the betrayed party is struggling. And then, maybe they start couples therapy, and that sort of helps guide them. And I don't mean to suggest here with this purple line that it just continues on and upward. It's very common for trauma to show up sort of out of the blue in this process. So what I want to help you understand here is that trauma happens, and it's very frequent and very intense at first. And over time, with excellent repair and arresting the behavior that was the betrayal behavior, the trauma becomes a little less frequent, a little less intense. And a good way out, maybe a year or so, you may not get so many trauma triggers, but every now and then something will trigger that betrayed party. They'll see somebody that represents, the acting out partner, or they'll just be, having a day where their intrusive thoughts for whatever reason haunt them. And they're likely to spike again into a trauma response. the important thing to know is that if you go to that and you repair using the 3 R's, using your touch and prosody and being willing and turning your defensiveness into curiosity and just being a really strong container for their feelings, that will subside. And, it may be that trauma shows up once in a blue moon, 10 years out, all of a sudden they get triggered. That's normal. That doesn't mean that you're losing your partner. Just know that when there's trauma, you got to attend to the trauma, and everything else will sort of fall in place. Is timeline of recovery 1 year different depending on how long cheating has gone on? 30 years, for sure. It depends on many factors. Depends on the partner's trauma experience in childhood too, and their whether they had healthy or insecure attachment with their primary caregivers, and then how many other layers of trauma that they've experienced. Right now with the Me Too movement, I think it's pretty obvious that many women have experienced lots of harassment and, for some, trauma throughout life. And then this being a sexual betrayal can also trigger that other trauma. And then, of course, the duration of the acting out behavior and the duration of the relationship. So even if the acting out behavior didn't go on very long, but you've been married with somebody for 30 years, and then you find out they have a secret life, that's really destabilizing. So yeah, I think those things are both factors. Thank you for that question. How often do you experience that partners have their own problems, such as codependency, etc.? When do you start to work with that, if there are any? Yeah, good question. So our field used to be focused on codependency for the partner. And it's taken a turn towards a trauma model, thankfully, because what all partners have pretty much across the board is trauma. But they don't all identify as codependent. Some do, some don't. I basically don't use the word codependent unless my client does, or unless I'm seeing significant evidence that throughout their life, in all their relationships, that they're showing some level of codependency. And the reason for that is that it's become sort of an ugly word with partners. They didn't do anything to cause this betrayal. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, the betrayer had the option of doing lots of different things. If they were unhappy in the relationship, they could have, gone to counseling, filed for divorce even. They could have talked to their person and said, this isn't working. But they chose to go outside. That's solely on the betrayer. Partners with sex addiction or with betrayal, the acting out behavior is hidden. So they didn't know. It's not like being the wife of a drug addict or something where you're seeing your person using. In this case, you aren't seeing the behavior. So it's hard to say that a betrayed party is codependent because of that, because it's not like they knew. Even when they had suspicions, they often were gaslighted, told that they weren't, accurate. Let's see, another one. My SA partner would like to do couples therapy in lieu of his own therapy. This seems like a bad idea. What do you think? I agree. I think it's a bad idea. I think, unfortunately, with this situation, there's a lot of therapy that initially needs to happen, and over time, you might be able to just do couples therapy. But at the beginning, it's very important for the betrayer to understand why they chose to betray. I want to get to my last slide here, one of my last slides. It's important for you as a betrayer to be a strong container for your partner's feelings and experience. Help your partner hold his or her emotions. This would also involve being really present for them, being available to them. Don't expect your partner to just get over it. We've talked about that. Your consistent change of behavior over time is what's going to help them heal, ultimately. You need to be practicing rigorous honesty, and you need to proactively reach out to your person and respond to them when they reach out to you. It's important that you figure out why you chose to be unfaithful, that you understand the origins of that for yourself. And that's going to probably involve, like we just were talking about, your own individual therapy process. It's very important that you're in a state of surrender. Patrick Carnes talks about sincere delusion in the sex addict. So this would be for addicts. And I would say for betrayers too, there's probably an amount of sincere delusion that happens where you sort of compartmentalize things, and you really think that you are keeping everything separate and that what your partner doesn't know won't hurt them and all that. But that really is a delusional way of thinking. And so the only antidote to that is surrender, is surrendering to a program or a process of health and well-being, where you learn new coping skills and learn to turn towards your partner and be transparent and hold your agreements and speak up for your needs. That's another really important part. Often underneath acting out behavior is some level of either codependency or just an inability to ask for your own needs. And so the two sort of go together. And if you arrest the acting out behavior, you still have to attend to this need to speak up for your wants and needs in the relationship. And that's an important part of this as well. And developing your ability to be vulnerable is also really important. My email is marty@martysimpsonmft.com. Feel free to email me and find me on the web. And I would be happy to send you, information or help you with whatever you need. Let's see. So let me go to questions now. Okay, hi Marty. My husband admits now, 1 year on, to lying through the lie detector test and passing. This is so much more trauma. Is it normal for the betrayer to lie? Working on it. First of all, my heart goes out to you. That's an awful situation to be in. Second, we didn't cover formal disclosure process, but they do often include polygraph. I will tell you that at least in the state of California, you don't need a license or certification to be a polygraph examiner. So it's very important. You can actually just buy a polygraph machine and hang a shingle and call yourself a polygraph examiner. And you don't necessarily have to have credentials. So it's very important that you research who's doing your polygraph and that you find that they are very highly recommended and credible and been doing the work for a long time. There's lots to say about polygraph, and perhaps I'll do another webinar sometime about the formal disclosure process. There's a ton to talk about there. But I'm so sorry that happened to you. And people will pass a polygraph if they truly forget part of their acting out behavior, which sometimes is the case with very long-term acting out or betrayal. And I'm wondering about the credentials of the polygraph examiner. Thanks so much for the question. I'm sorry that was your experience. Okay, I had one it looks like I missed. I've been active in self-help meetings, have a counselor, and I have been supportive of my partner who is a chronic relapser for years. When do you know when it's time to walk away and not feel so guilty? Well, I'm curious about the word guilty. And I would highly recommend that you work on this with a therapist and potentially, specifically a trauma specialist. Because, betrayal is a breaking of the agreement of the relationship. And often, even in communities like faith communities that don't condone divorce easily, often betrayal is one of the things that they will condone divorce over. And I'm not suggesting that that's what you do here, but I am curious about why you would feel guilty about ending a relationship in which there's been a lot of betrayal. And I'm so sorry that that's your experience. I do think that, I work a lot with partners who do choose to end their relationships as well. And I do think it's a very important thing to explore. It's very important, for instance, to explore whether you could leave and what it would take to leave. Because if you don't know that you could leave, then you really can't choose to stay because you're trapped. If you believe that you couldn't leave, then you're trapped. So it's an important exploration, even for those who want to stay. It's important to look at, what would I do if I did choose to leave? How would I do that? What would I need? Where are my social supports? A lot of times that will lead you to kind of realizing that you have a lack of social support or something like that, that will be great for you whether you stay or leave. Thanks for the question. What do you do if you do remember something after acting out for so long after being rigorously honest with your partner? Great question. Yeah, I am a fan of transparency. In order for trust to be rebuilt, I think it's very important, and I like to say it this way. It's important for you to be willing to tell the disappointing truth. So when something is difficult to say to your partner, it's very important that you get help with that you talk to a therapist, a sponsor, preferably both, and find the right language. Invite your partner into a therapy session so that your partner has some containment and some help. Sometimes you can get in touch with your partner's therapist and have them at the ready so that they can be contacted after you make a new disclosure. And then be willing to take a few steps back in your process together. Usually those recurrent bits of information, if they are told willingly and with an open heart and a willingness to help your partner heal, usually they don't send you back to square one again, but they often will be re-traumatizing, and you'll likely take a few steps back in your development of intimacy and things like that. Thanks for the question. If the betrayed person was a virgin before the marriage, does their response vary from a person who was not a virgin? Quite possibly so. I have worked with couples where this is the situation. And depending upon your beliefs about marriage and sexual contact and things like that, I would say that those, maybe a faith community or something is going to guide your specific reaction to that. But it can be very, very traumatizing for that person because they've invested so much in their partner and in the marriage, and went into it with a pure heart, and found out then that their person didn't. So that's obviously really traumatizing. I have also worked with partners who took a period of separation where they decided to be separate, and they made a decision that the betrayer would not see other people during this separation, but the betrayed party wanted to. And that, betrayed party sort of did his own work to sort of level that playing field, and they got back together and healed very nicely. So I think it's a very individual, discussion about what you do with that situation, but absolutely, I think it could be another layer of trauma. Yeah. Should I share this presentation with my betrayed partner? Absolutely. I think it shows a willingness that you're really trying here, that you're wanting to utilize these skills. And quite often, the betrayed party will help you remember to use the 3 R's, or to turn your defensiveness into curiosity. And so it can actually help the process. May not feel too good when they remind you of those things in the moment, but it's also an indication that they're on your team, that they're wanting you to succeed at this too. Yeah, thanks for the question. My spouse who cheated on me wants to keep emphasizing his pain and what led him there, and not acknowledging his year-long affair. He does not empathize with me. He keeps blaming me of all things, and that I made him do it and I led him there. He says I did not value him, and that's why he did it, and continued. He also attributes my relationship with my children as me not paying attention with him. Yeah, I find that last piece to be very common, that often a betrayed, and this in the case of heterosexual couples, often a betrayed husband will feel left out when the children come along. That sometimes will kind of peak acting out behavior, even if it's already gone on. It'll accelerate at that time. sometimes. So, like I said at the beginning, every relationship has its own relational wounds and, problems. Every relationship, my own. And nothing that you did caused your partner to act out. Because your partner could have come to you and said, this doesn't work for me. We've got to go to counseling. He could have even left the relationship. I mean, there are lots of things he could have done that would have been maybe more in his integrity rather than hiding this behavior from you and seeking his needs, even if he felt they were legitimate, elsewhere. Thank you for the question. My therapist suggested to have my wife at my therapy sessions as an exercise to build trust. She'll be an observer. I know it's been hard for me to trust and display vulnerability. I wonder if this would help. I think it would. Thoughts? Might help. I would, as long as you really trust your therapist to be a good container for the two of you, because it can be triggering too, especially if you're being vulnerable in session and you are talking very candidly, as you are probably inclined to do with your therapist. There could be triggers that come up. So if that therapist is ready to hold all that and you trust them to do that, I think, inviting your partner in 1 or 2 times, I certainly have done that in the past with my clients, can be helpful. Yeah. Define shame versus guilt. Great question. Shame is I am a bad person, which can lead to a suicidal ideations. Guilt is I did something wrong, and it provides our moral compass. Well, you did a great job of defining it right there. It's pretty much what I would have said. I don't think taking a walk is all about yourself, and taking a walk will help. I don't know what that means. I don't think taking a walk is all about yourself, and taking a walk will help. To me, this should be a red flag for a person who will spiral further. Oh, I think you're responding to if you're going into a shame spiral and you're realizing you need a structured timeout. You're saying that you don't think taking a walk will help. I think for some people it will. I think you have to know yourself, and if you're a therapist, you have to know your client before you make a recommendation like that. But for most people, when they can recognize that they're going into a shame spiral, they also have the ability to either walk or go into the bedroom and journal or something like that to identify where they got triggered in the conversation and come back with more information. Like, when you started talking about my mom, that's what triggered me. And I want to apologize for making it about me in that moment or something like that. Shame definitely can lead to suicidal ideation. And an escalation of acting out behavior can lead a person to feeling those very desperate feelings of despair and despondency. And anyone who is suicidal, if you find yourself having suicidal thoughts, I highly encourage you to call 911 immediately or go to your nearest emergency room. And I do want you to know that this situation does get better. And it is often an awakening to being a more conscious person. And so there are so many good things about stepping into recovery for all the parties involved, for betrayers, for the betrayed, and for couples in recovery. Thank you for that question. All right. Well, I just want to thank you all for being part of this today. I want to encourage you to reach out to me if you need help or if you want some further discussion about the points that we discussed today. And I want to wish you the best in taking excellent care of your person. Thanks. Have a good weekend. Bye.